Grab your popcorn, let's talk Second Coming theories. Wait, this is not Sunday school.
Hey guys, in this video I'm answering a question that I received on a video that I did recently where I talked about some food for thought considerations on an old prophecy that was supposedly uttered by Joseph Smith about 8 days before he died. And in that video I mentioned Ezra's eagle as it's interpreted by Michael Rush, and someone asked me what I was talking about and if I could explain. So this is a little diagram. It illustrates one interpretation of an apocryphal prophecy. And it's important to point out that this is just a person's interpretation of a prophecy, not the actual prophecy itself, and that it's in the Apocrypha, which is not canonized. And this is generally referring to a group of books that at one point were included in the King James Bible in the middle between the Old and New Testament, because they bridge the Old and New Testament, like the stories of them bridge those two books. But eventually it was taken out of the King James Bible. These are not part of our canon and they're not considered canon, but the church views them as having some value because of how they link the Old and New Testament, and also because they actually describe a migration of the scattering of Israel, the ancient scattering. And second Esdras, it had a lot to do with the scattering of Israel and then this kind of regathering in the end time. So the second book of Esdras contains 7 visions or revelations that are made, we think, to the prophet Ezra, who is represented as grieving over the afflictions of his people, and he's perplexed at the triumph of all of these Gentile sinners against the house of Israel. And this book, it is totally melancholy the way they are describing it here, but it also notes how the Lord fulfills the promises to the house of Israel in the end time. And these 7 visions, you can compare them to John the Revelator's vision in the book of Revelation, or to Isaiah's vision, which is the whole book of Isaiah. It can be viewed as one vision. There's some scholarship to this effect. And when you do that, you can kind of line them up and see that there are many parallels and similarities. And then it also connects to the book of Daniel and the visions that Daniel sees. Daniel sees 4 visions. And when you put those 4 visions together, you get like a view of the end time. And you see types and shadows being established of this full story of how the Lord is going to gather his people and judge the wicked, is kind of the gist of it. In the Guide to the Scriptures, we get a little bit of information about the Apocrypha as well. Notice here it highlights section 91 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and this is because during the time that Joseph Smith was doing his Bible translation, he had asked about the Apocrypha if it needed to be translated. The Lord told him, "There are many things contained therein that are true, and it is mostly translated correctly. There are many things contained therein that are not true, which are interpolations by the hands of men." So he didn't need to translate the Apocrypha. And then the Lord also told him that whoso readeth it, let him understand, for the Spirit manifesteth truth, and whoso is enlightened by the Spirit shall obtain benefit therefrom. And in the Bible dictionary, it explains what we might benefit from. I have a Bible app that includes the Apocrypha, but you can literally Google this and you just type in Second Esdras, chapter 11. The majority of the prophecy is in that chapter. It actually starts in chapter 10, verse 59. This is where the vision starts. So you see here it says, "And so shall the highest shew thee visions of the high things, which the Most High will do unto them that dwell upon the earth in the last days." And that verse sort of just leads into or segues into this vision. And remember, there's 7 visions in Second Ezra. So this is just one part of 7 visions. And when you put these 7 visions together, you get the full picture. And then the vision starts in chapter 11, and you see it's talking about an eagle rising up out of the sea. It has 12 feathered wings and 3 heads. Now, I've done a lot of research on this apocryphal prophecy, and I've found scholars who've suggested that there may have been interpolations by the hands of men in this prophecy, and they actually view some of the texts as possibly having been added later. One scholar viewed it as they thought that it could be that it was originally one eagle with one head and 12 wings, and that the extra heads and short feathers were added later. So that's just something to know. And the reason I bring it up is because you kind of have to keep all of this in mind when you're looking at this, because you have to take it with a grain of salt. And there's just a lot going on here to maybe consider in trying to understand it. And especially when you're going to be looking at a person's interpretation of it, because then you're like even one more step removed from the actual prophecy. So not only do we have scholars and interpolations by the hands of men, but then we also have interpretations by men today. And so just something to think about. And this will go all the way through chapter 11. It's describing what happens. I'm going to show you in the diagram what happens based on this modern interpretation, this very pop culture analysis. And it ends here in chapter 12, about verse 36. And pretty much this eagle beast rises. It's connected to Daniel through the text itself. You'll notice in chapter 12, verse 11, it says, "The eagle whom thou sawest came up from the sea is the kingdom which was seen in the vision by thy brother Daniel." So this is linked to the beast in Daniel. They're seeing what seems like maybe the same thing, but it seems like maybe in this apocryphal account in Second Ezra's, you're getting some extra details that Daniel isn't getting, and you're seeing it a different way, from like a different angle or perspective, or maybe a different aspect of it. But it's definitely connected somehow to Daniel's beast. So that's just kind of important context as well. And it plays into Michael Rush's interpretation, and some of the more wild theories that he has about it were because of how he was linking it in scriptures that are in the canon. And so if you look back down here about verse 36, it says right here, this is kind of where it ends. "Thou hast been meet to know this secret of the highest." And then in verse 37, the Lord tells him to write it down. So that's where that part of these 7 visions ends, and it's the full part of the eagle portion of his visions. But notice how in this little old diagram here, you see there's the presidents, and you've got short feathers and long feathers on one wing, and then you've got all short feathers on another wing, and there's these 3 eagle heads in the middle. Well, the long wing, it tells the part of the story where somehow these evil secret combinations have gotten hold in governments, and this eagle is rising up out of the sea, or this evil beast, like in Daniel's, rising up out of the sea. It seeks to overthrow the freedom of all people. And the point at which Rush was interpreting the prophecy is beginning with Hoover, because he sees some connections in American history and some different political things that are happening at that time that play into the idea that these secret combinations may have finally gotten root and taken hold of the government at that point. So that is helpful to know. But the way he was connecting it here is really because of FDR. So FDR, he served longer than any other president. It was because of how long he served that the law was actually changed to prevent people from being able to serve as long as him. So Rush had identified him as possibly being like this long feather, which is longer than all the rest. And that's one of the little parts of the prophecy where it talks about this second one is it serves way more time than everybody else. So that was kind of what gave him that first connection into American history. So he came up with this interpretation, and he decided to apply it to American presidents and just kind of see what that looks like. And this is a diagram of what that might look like. So you would have Hoover, FDR being the long feather, another regular feather would be Truman, then Eisenhower, and then we would have a short feather, and that would be JFK, who was assassinated. Then you would have another regular feather, Lyndon B. Johnson, and then another short feather, which would be Nixon. Richard Nixon was impeached, and there was a whole scandal around that called Watergate. Now, then you go continue with the regular feathers. We've got 8, 9, all the way up through Obama, which is number 14. Well, at that point, then the story shifts, and there's like a turning point where these eagle heads, they wake up with what's happening over here with these short feathers. And Trump was after Obama, so he would be the first short feather. Biden was after Trump, so he would be the next short feather. And what I was suggesting in the video, where I was talking about some other prophecies and theories about the second coming that maybe this could connect to, was that we may not be on feathers number 3 or 4 yet. We may not have seen that yet. We might just still be seeing that feather 1 is still in play. He was never out of play. Feather 2 interrupted it. And feather 2 is sooner away than feather 1 on the short wing. So short feather number 1 basically has to serve longer than feather number 2. And so far that's been true. And so there was some talk among people about this, and I had a conversation with someone who thought that maybe we just weren't past these first 2 feathers and we're still on them and we haven't seen 3 and 4 yet. And what's supposed to happen with 3 and 4 is pretty drastic. It appears to be an internal war, internal conflict, where these eagle heads wake up, the middle one goes and takes action against 3 and 4, preventing them from taking their place in this lineup of presidents. And then this whole chaotic scene occurs where you've got one eagle head killing another eagle head and one dying in its bed. It's just like chaos, basically, is the idea that's happening there. But the eagle heads, they die during this time, like when these eagle heads are kind of ruling and reigning and going out. There's this lion that comes in second Ezra chapter 12, and the lion lectures the eagle, and the lion plays a role in essentially judging this eagle. And while that's happening, then these other 2 little feathers, 5 and 6, who for a short time go and hide under one of the eagle heads and then they come back into play, well, they're the last 2 feathers who rule and reign. And during this time of what looks like internal wars and chaos, the lion scene happens and this judgment scene happens, and then the eagle burns. And so I was just proposing maybe you pull back away from Russia's theory a little bit on this and just kind of keep the idea that it may have something to do with America. And it may also have to do with just what other prophecies seem to allude to, which is strife among the Gentile nations, the Gentile Christian nations. And maybe with regard to the other things that I was linking it to in the previous videos where I'd mentioned it, maybe it's just showing one aspect of all of these prophecies, and that aspect would be that divine judgment scene, and when that wrath begins to be poured out, or when you transition from internal wars and wars of preparation that help to change boundary lines and bring the gospel to people. And then we transition under Duane Crowther's theory into external wars. And I'll show you that really quick just to remind you. Here's Crowther's chart again, just to recollect. And the way that I saw Ezra's eagle fitting into this was that Ezra's eagle seems like a chaos motif of a takedown of this beast system due to internal wars. And this is part of Crowther's chronology. He has anarchy and internal wars will cause the collapse of the government of the United States and other nations. And this is during a backdrop of warfare where it transitions from preparatory wars to wars of total destruction. And this is actually what he has as the demarcation or sign of the time of the Gentiles being fulfilled. So that's what he sees as the sign that's associated with it. And when we transition into this like final war of total destruction, it's basically like the type of war intensifies, and it changes from being one that opens up nations to the gospel to one that it actually kind of closes up for a little while, and we see that there's just chaos in the world and people are fleeing. And during that, he has this gathering of Israel physically, like people gathering towards and stakes physically, and to Zion, the New Jerusalem in America, and then Zion, the Old Jerusalem, in literal modern day Jerusalem. And this would lead to what we would all know as Armageddon and this Mount of Olives experience, which we would know as the third key appearance of Jesus Christ according to Latter-day Saint framework on the second coming. This is where the first resurrection begins. And somewhere in there is like the winding up scenes and this big moment where Christ eventually comes for his fourth and final appearance to the world in glory. And then that's what begins the change of the earth into the millennial world. And notice how he has paired with this period of war, there's like this gospel being preached to the Gentile nations. But then when that internal war starts, it transitions. And now the focus is on a mission to the house of Israel, like the original house of Israel. So think Northern Kingdom and Southern Kingdom. That's kind of what it's referencing. And then there's this mission to the heathen nations. These are like the non-Christian nations, the ones who didn't know Jehovah. And then there's just finally a mission to everybody that goes all the way through to the millennium, like to the end of it. So that's how Crowther has it split out. And I just saw Ezra's Eagle as possibly talking about this part of the full like end time period. And this covers pretty much from the restoration all the way through to the second coming on Crowther's chart. And I think that most prophecies do too. They seem to cover that whole period. Okay, so just to recap, Ezra's eagle, we haven't seen the feathers 3 and 4, the eagle heads yet, and this is a chaos motif. This will connect to Duane Crowther's internal wars portion of his chronology. The Mosiah Hancock statement about Democrats and Republicans ties in with Elon Musk. And then we've got some church news about Russia and China, which kind of fits into these signs of the times and prophetic commentary that involves Russia and China as part of the Doctrine and Covenants, Section 87 war prophecies. And you can kind of see in the past where President Benson hit on communism pretty hard. And Crowther had pulled this into his book as well. This connects to Daniel and his prophecies. All these together, you can see some repeats and multiple fulfillment of prophecy. And then hopefully that all builds up to the final appearance of Jesus Christ.